I would totally like to hijack this video and talk about the book Guards by Terry Pratchett, but instead we're going to talk about GuardDuty from AWS. When I first mapped out the S.L.A.W game plan, this was going to be lab number 4. But I realized it would work a lot better once we had things like our organization, IAM Identity Center, and delegated administration set up. Normally, GuardDuty, which is what we're going to do today, is something that I try to enable in the first day of the life of any new AWS account or organization, which shows you how important that is. Putting on my historian hat again, which I can do because I have a history degree and I don't have a tech degree, so I have no idea why you trust me to do this stuff. I'd like to take you back to the bad old early days of cloud when we lacked any kind of visibility or even IAM. These are the dark days. Or they would have been if any attackers had understood cloud or anyone other than Netflix put up something important there. And this was before Stranger Things, so even that Netflix bit is a little bit debatable. CloudTrail was our first blast of sunlight that allowed us to see what was going on in our accounts, but it was still really hard to interpret that for security purposes. In 2017, Amazon added GuardDuty. This is basically a kind of an intrusion detection system for the cloud. Now, for those of you that don't have a background in security, IDS has been around for a while, and it used to refer to only network monitors that sniffed all the network traffic where you connected to the internet and then looked for activities that were signs of an attack. Now, it's evolved a lot since then, and we have different flavors of detecting intruders, and we use the term threat monitoring more. We just talk about IDS for the network piece of things. And GuardDuty fits neatly into that threat monitoring bucket. The TLDR is that GuardDuty monitors a bunch of telemetry feeds in AWS and then uses a range of different detection technologies to produce what they call findings. These findings are signs of potential attacks. Now, it's not guaranteed, but they are indicators that there might be an attack going on. And there are some cool aspects for how GuardDuty works that most people don't realize when they first start. One of those is that GuardDuty monitors CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, and DNS logs, and we're going to get there, and a few things even if you don't turn them on. How? Because Amazon's always producing the events. It's just that when you enable flow logs or enable DNS logs, that's when it starts recording them someplace, and that's when you get charged. With GuardDuty, you don't have to turn them on or pay those fees for those services. Now, there are fees associated with GuardDuty, and you still need to pay those. But you get that information out of the VPC flow logs or DNS logs, and again, a couple other sources without having to pay to turn those on or to store those. GuardDuty pricing is also based on activity. So that means that there's no cost to turn it on, even in accounts and regions, as long as you're not doing anything in those accounts and regions. You only pay for the accounts and regions where things are active. And because of that, I recommend turning it on kind of almost everywhere. In terms of how it works, Amazon uses a mix of threat intelligence feeds, heuristics, which is a kind of machine learning. Now look, I'm not going to say AI because those are like dirty words right now, or letters, words, whatever, and their own detectors. You don't get any insight into exactly how those work on the back end. So it's a bit of a black box in terms of how Amazon is looking for this activity and detecting and then sending you these findings. There's also additional monitoring capabilities and detectors that you can enable when you use certain features, and you don't have to use them. You can selectively enable monitoring of S3 or Elastic Kubernetes Service Protection. These are usually going to cost you extra, and they'll use additional telemetry sources. Now, similar to the main log sources, you don't have to turn on the new telemetry events like S3 data events, which is something we're going to cover way later. GuardDuty will monitor the feed, and then you pay GuardDuty rates, but you don't also pay the rates to turn on those data events. I think later we might actually turn that one on. We'll see how we get to it in the lab. Findings also can create real-time events. Now, a finding might take 20 to 40 minutes to show up, depending on how AWS is detecting it. But then that creates an event, and you can store that in files. You can send it to S3 for analysis, or you can use it to trigger things like alerts, which we're going to do relatively soon. And GuardDuty has advanced a ton, even since I just started doing CloudSLA. It has container detection, endpoint security for your instances, those virtual machines, and even more. But it has some drawbacks, and at least one of those we're going to see today. The biggest is that it is a regional service. When you turn it on, you have to turn it on for every individual region. Even though we're going to do delegated administration and we're going to set it to turn on and cover all of our accounts in the entire organization, we have to walk through and flip those settings on in each individual region. So you have to enable it in each region. There's no central way to turn it on. Now, look, in a real big organization, you're going to use infrastructure as code, those CloudFormation templates that we did a while back in these labs. We're going to do it all manual in the console today, though. The other drawback is that not all findings are created equal, and they're not all created equal for all environments. Some of these things are based on things like machine learning and pattern analysis, and you might get false positives. You might get alerts that don't matter. This is especially true in development environments because there's a lot of weird things going on. And in a production environment, you're probably going to get fewer of these. GuardDuty can also miss things. I have an attack simulation I do, which does what's known as an SSH brute force. Again, we'll get there for you non-security people. And that attack does not always consistently trigger. Sometimes GuardDuty sees it, and sometimes they don't. So we're going to learn more about that as we start going through and using GuardDuty. We're actually going to deliberately generate some alerts as we go on, but you do want to be careful and understand and manage those. You don't want to turn it on all of your 2,765 corporate development accounts and then send all those alerts to emails without knowing what the effect is going to be, or you might become unpopular pretty quickly. And again, GuardDuty isn't free. There's a lot of things in Amazon that aren't free. We've mostly been able to stay at the free tier, but for GuardDuty, you get 30 days of free, and then after that, you have to pay for it. So do be prepared. You're going to see some new charges in your account. Now remember, my account, and I run all this stuff a week or two ahead of when you guys all see it, many months ahead of when some of you see it. So I'm going to be watching my account, and if we need to turn it off, we will. But in my experience, at the levels of activity we're going to have, we're maybe a couple of bucks a month is what this is going to charge in aggregate with a lot of the other things that we're going to do. So we do need to know how to enable GuardDuty. I do recommend having it on even your play accounts, your practice accounts, because then you get to used to it. You get to see how it works. I do understand there's cases where you need to turn it off because of those charges. And again, when we need to do that, we'll go ahead and do that. And feel free, if you are uncomfortable with it, you can always disable it at any point and then re-enable it for future labs. All right. Today's key lesson points is GuardDuty is like an intrusion detection system for AWS, looks at a bunch of sources and uses Amazon's managed detectors to tell you if you have potential malicious activity, like crypto mining or unusual IAM activity. GuardDuty uses a range of telemetry sources, things that are these monitoring sources, including what you normally have to turn on and pay extra for if you want to look at them yourself. But just by turning on GuardDuty, GuardDuty will watch the events, those services for that activity without you saving the log files down and also being charged for them. So you're only going to pay for what you use on the GuardDuty side. And if you do turn on, say, VPC flow logs, you are going to pay for those. And we're going to play with those a little bit in a while. But when we do, we're going to turn them on and then turn it off. In your real corporate environment, you're probably going to have a bunch of those things on anyway. GuardDuty charges based on the activity. And so I get a lot of orgs to turn it on in regions they don't use. And the answer is yeah. I mean, there have been real world breaches, ones that you have read about in the newspapers. No, I'm lying. Nobody has newspapers anymore. But you've read about them online, and they would have been caught if GuardDuty was enabled in those regions that were unused. And you pay very little for it if there's no activity. Now, in our case, I had us lock out all the regions except 2. And one of the reasons for that, and using that service control policy, is to prepare us so we only have to turn on GuardDuty in those 2 regions. Although if I was in a very large enterprise, I'd still turn it on in those locked out regions as well. But for our purposes, we've got all of our regions locked down except US East 1 and US West 2, and we're only going to have to turn GuardDuty on in those 2 live regions. With that, let's get started, and we're going to enable GuardDuty, turn on delegated administration, and then go through the process again to set it up for the other regions. As usual, we're going to start in the IAM Identity Center portal. I wonder if I close this, if it's going to pop up every single time I log in. Let's give that one a shot. And we want to go into our management account. So go to Cloud.SL.A.W and Administrator Access. Remember, we're going to enable this for our entire organization. So we do have to initially set up delegated administration. The other thing is this version of delegated administration, you need to know your account ID. In our case, we're going to use our security audit account. So I'm going to zoom in. Now you all know, whoops, let's see if I can do my copy and paste a little bit cleaner here. And that is the account ID of that security audit account. So I'm going to paste that or copy that onto my clipboard because I'm going to need that in just a moment. I'll go into the console. Let's go to GuardDuty. And just type in guard, you get GuardDuty. And we're going to go to get started. So remember, 30-day free trial here. Zooming in, 30-day free trial. Okay, get started. So we're going to enable GuardDuty, and you have to have these service permissions enabled. These are just the things that it's going to turn on. And this is going to turn on all the default GuardDuty protection plans except runtime monitoring. And we're going to use that at a future date and time. So this is the warning of we're going to charge you. Also, before I click this, I'm going to paste in my account ID for delegated administration. And so let's go ahead and enable GuardDuty. Oh, I guess we need to go back into the settings. And then now we're going to enable delegated administration. I did forget to mention it. I am in the US West Oregon region. Remember, GuardDuty is region specific. And so I've done delegated admin and great. So we can now run GuardDuty from that other account. But let's go ahead and walk through that process again in US East 1. So I'm going to switch over to US East 1. And you'll notice that the GuardDuty console, it's like we just started. So let's go ahead and we'll click Get Started. Let me see if I can delegate out. It might actually let me do this and click Delegate. Yep, so we're all set. Now I can log into that account down to and to make changes, but I'm going to enable GuardDuty here as well. And that's going to have that turned on. So now GuardDuty is all set up. And let's go back over into the settings and just spend a moment looking at those. So this is the permissions for the service role. It's delegated administration. You notice we have not turned on permissions to enable malware protection for the member account. So that's an additional cost feature that is, oops, sorry, I had a little bit of an alarm there on the side. That's an additional cost feature that we'll get into. And we're pretty good here. So GuardDuty is all enabled. And we have delegated it to that security audit account. I'm going to log out of this account. And then I'm going to close this window. Now I'm still in my portal. And let's go into security audit. And this time, because we want to be able to potentially make some changes, let's use our security full admin. And this will allow us to adjust GuardDuty settings. I'm going to go into GuardDuty. And we're going to go into our settings here again. And let me double check one thing. And let's go into accounts. Now this is going to show you all the member accounts where this is set up. And you'll notice that this is important. Auto enable is off. So right now you have to manually enable it across the accounts. Let's edit this. And we want to enable for all accounts. So this is going to be all current accounts and all future accounts with the foundational data sources, which are some of the ones that I talked about before, VPC flow logs and such. At this time, we are not going to auto-enable S3. That will increase our cost pretty quickly. And you notice these are some of these ones that will cost you a bunch more if you enable them. Just a quick review. So S3, we'll look for interesting S3 activity. You guys know who S3 is. The Elastic Kubernetes service, that's going to look for weird things in the Kubernetes management plane. Runtime monitoring, you would actually install software agents and it'll actually look at activity in your instances and in your containers. Malware protection, which is looking for malicious software, uses a couple of techniques for that. RDS, Relational Database Service, and Lambda Network Activity Monitoring. So these are all additional things. And again, when we started CloudSLA, these were not all here, but it's pretty cool stuff. We're going to limit ourselves to enable for all accounts with just the foundational services and click Save Changes. Now, there is a little bug in the console. Even though we said to enable for new and existing accounts, you can see here that we have no member accounts. This little segment I'm actually recording a day later. I wondered if it was a timing issue. It turns out Amazon is just not adding these. So simple enough. Just go ahead and as soon as you've done that first part, click on that drop-down box. That will select all of those accounts. Go to Actions, Add Member, Add Member. Now we have GuardDuty enabled for all of those accounts. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page, and that counter should increase. And it's still in the process of enabling them. So it takes a little bit for them to go ahead and enable it. And remember, we don't have any of those protection plans. All right, with that, let's get back to the main part of the lab. And let's go back into settings here. And I want to show you a little bit what it looks like. So we're going to go to Settings, Sample Findings, Generate Sample Findings. Now these findings are now being generated so that we can actually take a look at them if we go to Findings. So instead of being empty, we have examples of findings in a bunch of the different types that are now in our account. And you can filter based on these. So let's see. Let's filter on high. And ooh, there's backdoor. So EC2, Command and Control Activity is what that means. Let's click on it. And we can scroll down here and see we get all the information about it. Where did it occur? Which account is in it? Which instance was it where we detected this? Obviously, that is a fake ID for an AWS instance. Did we automatically scan for malware? We did not because we didn't enable that. And heck, we're in the delegated admin account and we don't have permission to enable that. And then you can really dig in. It'll give you the role that the resource has. So that's the IAM role. We haven't used those yet for instances because we haven't launched an instance here, which is a virtual machine. The resource type instance, the port, and then a whole bunch of other details that we would use during our investigation. Now, this is a generated finding, so it's going to be obviously not real, but you can see there's a lot of really interesting information that you can use all the way down to, where did it originate from? Was there a city and a county based on doing reverse DNS lookups? Lots of really cool stuff. So, hey, again, we don't spend a lot of time on these labs. We've got 15 to 30 minutes. We went through this pretty quickly. We enabled GuardDuty in both regions. Oh, and I almost forgot, we're in North Virginia. This is the annoying thing about region-specific services. Let's go back to Oregon. And you'll notice I have no findings in Oregon. And if I go into Accounts, I will have auto-enable is off again. So let's edit and enable for all the accounts and save changes. Okay, here's how this is going to work now. GuardDuty is going to be monitoring US West 2 and US East 1 for all of your accounts. And as we add new accounts, it will be automatically enabled for those new accounts. Now, in a couple of coming labs, I'm going to show you how to aggregate more of this information so you can actually see the results not only across accounts and across regions. There's a little bit of a trick we're going to learn that not everybody knows about, and we'll take advantage of that. That's it for this week. You now have intrusion detection enabled on your account, or a form of it. So threat monitoring, intrusion detection, security monitoring service for the cloud. I don't care what you call it. I just know that GuardDuty is one of those things I use all the time, every time. And look, even if the findings aren't always the best, we're going to learn how to filter those. And it is going to catch stuff that would be hard or impossible for us to build threat detectors. And that's the key word. It would be hard or impossible for us to build those ourselves at the scale that GuardDuty is running. Have a great week, and we're going to play more with this service next week.